Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet and you are watching a new episode on the Wojennik TV YouTube channel. There are some game categories which are quite rare in my collection, which do not land on my table very frequently. And one of such categories are logical games. It's quite strange because some time ago, a few years back, I used to play chess regularly. I even went to a chess club. I played in tournaments. But since then, I decided to play other games. I decided to concentrate on other categories of games. So logical games from time to time appear on my table, but quite rarely. It concerns chess. It concerns, for instance, the brilliant Muros Gallicus. But as I said, those games are not a very important part of my collection and not a very part of my gaming life. So when I acquire a new logical game, I do not have high expectations. I just want to try it. I just want to verify how it works. And one of such games is a game that I would like to show you today, and it is Agamemnon. Looking at the title, you might expect that this game is all about the Trojan War. But in reality, it's a classic logical game. It's a game in which two players will try to overcome their opponent using the same types of playing pieces. The game was published in 2016 by Osprey Games and it was designed by Günther Kornet. The game is meant to be played by players 12 years up, but I have played this game also with a 10-year-old who really played very well. The game should last only 20 or 30 minutes, so it is a game which time of play is really sympathetic. How this game works, how this game looks, I would like to explain it during this review, and at the end I would like to give my final opinion and to give a final verdict if this is a logical game which is something interesting enough to be discovered. At first, let's take a brief look at all the elements enclosed in this elegant box in which Agamemnon is being sold. The first and most important element is the game board which will represent the territory or the place where the struggle between both players will take place. On this board we will find spaces on which we will be placing playing tiles and then connections between those playing spaces. Those connections are of three different types, as you can see. Those connections, called the strings of fate, will be of three different types. The first one is a strength connection, so we will have some strength tiles. The second one will be a leadership connection with leadership strings upon them. And third of all, force strings, force connections, which will have force strings placed upon them. Those strings, those tiles, are rectangular small tiles which will be placed on those connections on the board during setup. Now, I have not prepared the board in order to play because I wanted to show you the other side of the board, because Agamemnon has also a second possibility of playing the game. We receive a variant called the Loom, and it's a different board than the basic one, which is recommended for advanced players. The difference is that here we have four different types of connections, but it does not mean that we receive full sets of those connections of those strings. We receive only one piece of each one. Now, when preparing this board, we will randomly choose three of those four tiles, and each of those tiles will correspond to one of the three basic tiles. So when preparing this board, we will be creating different structures, different different types of connections. So each time we play the game on this side of the board, we can receive a different configuration, because one time, for instance, leadership strings can be associated to gray connections, whereas during overplay, strength strings can be associated to the same gray tile, to the same gray connection. So as you can see, we have really a great replayability and really a great possibility of creating different types of balls during gameplay. Returning to the other side, as I said earlier, we have some connections between spaces where playing tiles will be played, and as you can see, not each space is connected to the same number of other spaces, because we have some located in the center of the board, spaces located in the center of the board, which are connected to even 4 different places through 4 different strings, whereas others, those somewhere on the edges, are connected only to 2 places through 2 different strings. So while placing your own tiles, you will have to carefully choose which of those places to take, but I will talk about it a little bit later. An element, a very important element that we receive apart the string tiles, which I have already shown you, are the playing pieces, and each player receives the same types of pieces because the sets are the same. One of them will be black, and those will be Greek playing pieces, and the second one will be orange, and those will be the Trojan army. Looking at all those playing pieces, we can see that we have 3 different playing tiles. The first one are leaders, which have first of all a letter, and secondly a certain number of weapons upon them, indicating their strength. So those spears can differentiate on leaders from 1 even up to 4, whereas the letters are from A to E. A is the most important leader in each army, and for instance, for the Trojan army, thus this will be Aeneas. The second one would be Memnon, then Hector, etc. So this leadership information is important, because then while deciding who controls a string of fate, we will be looking at the letter closest to A. Then we have warriors, which do not have any letter on them, but they have a certain number of spears. Of course, 3 spears is much better than 1. And finally, we have also some special playing tiles of 2 kinds. Weavers, which are divided into 2 different kinds of playing pieces, and those will be warp tiles and weft tiles. Warp tiles and weft tiles. Warp tiles will be used to change the place where strings placed on the board were put, and weft tiles will be used to split connected strings at the point where this playing tile was placed. Both players receive those player aids in order to see which playing tiles they have already used and which are still available in their playing tiles mix. The last component which we receive in Agamemnon is the rulebook. The rulebook is really a short one. It's a rulebook printed on a paper of good quality, well-written rulebook in color. The rules of Agamemnon are pretty straightforward, so it was not really hard to create a fine rulebook, but I have already seen some games with simple rules but badly written rulebooks. This one is absolutely okay. At the end of it, you can see the variants. First of all, the loom, secondly the oracle. An interesting thing is also an edition where we can read about the Greek and Trojan leaders included in the game. And that's it when it comes to the components enclosed in the box of Agamemnon. Now let's take a look at how the game works. After choosing the side of the board, after preparing the board by placing the string tiles, each player receives his own counter mix, his own playing pieces mix. The player has to put all of those playing tiles face down in order to not see which tiles he draws, and then players decide randomly who begins play. The first player, during his first move, randomly chooses one of his playing tiles and he places this tile anywhere he wants on the board. The second player will then choose two of his playing tiles and he will place them on the board wherever he likes as well. If during the first two moves a player happens to draw a weaver tile, a warp or a weft tile, he has the possibility to discard such a tile, so to place it back in his counter mix, and he can choose randomly another playing piece, and then he can place both playing tiles wherever he wants. Then the opponent takes two of their tiles, again with the possibility of discarding weavers if he happens to draw them during the first two moves, in order to draw two other playing pieces. And so on, players will place playing pieces on the board until they have used all of their playing tiles. The game ends when both players have used all of their tiles, and then we can calculate the points. At the end of the game, it can happen that some spaces will remain empty, so not each space has to be filled in order to end the game. It's just the counter mix of each player which decides if the game stops or if it continues. So playing those tiles, placing them on the board is quite quick, because Agamemnon is a fast and quick game. So as you can see, I have placed all the playing tiles on the board. We have two spaces left at the end. That's a normal situation. Now, during gameplay, one thing can alter the shape of the board, and those are the warp tiles, because warp tiles can change the connections which are next to the space where the warp tile has been placed. A player, when placing his warp tile on a space, has the possibility to change the connections, two of the connections around such a space. So for instance, by placing the warp tile up here, I could swap the two connections located next to this playing tile. The second weaver tile, so the weft tile, doesn't permit a player to change the connections around such a space, but such a tile splits all connected strings at that point. What are those strings? Well, strings are playing tiles connected one to another. So for instance, here we have a long strength string which is being connected through different spaces. But unfortunately, the orange player has placed a weft tile up here. So this string, which normally would be comprised of many playing tiles, because it would be a string comprised of 5 playing tiles. Here, this weft tile cut this string into 2. So this string stops up here. It's only a 2 tile string, whereas the second one will be a 3 tile string. At the end of the game, so when all players have used their playing pieces, we verify who controls each and every string on the playing board. How we do this? Well, we have three different types of strings. The first one are strength strings, and a strength string is being controlled by the player who has the most number of spears in that string. So here, for instance, we have a small 2-tile string. We verify the tiles placed along this string. We see that the orange player has 5 spears and the black does not even have a playing tile. Let's check it out somewhere else. For instance, here we have a 4-tile strength string, along which the black player has 3, 4, 5 and 6 spears, whereas the orange player has only 2 on his E leader. So this string at the end of the game will be scored by the black player. He removes those tiles and he adds them to his own reserve. The playing pieces stay on the board. We score each string on the board in the same way. The second type of string is a leadership string. For instance, here we have a leadership string, or here a small leadership string, or here we have a little longer leadership string comprised of 4 playing tiles. Oh no, it's cut up here, so those are 2 different strings. So if we have a string where we have leaders of both sides, we verify which player has the most powerful leader along this string. And looking at this string, we see that the orange player has a B leader, whereas the black player has a D leader. B is closest to A, is closer to A, so the string will be controlled by the orange player, who can score all those leadership tiles. He receives them because he controls them. The third type of strings are force strings, which will be controlled by the player who has the most playing pieces along the string. So the strength of those tiles will not matter. It's the number of playing pieces which matters. For instance, here we have a string composed, oh, it's cut, so maybe somewhere else. Let's check it out here. For instance, here we have a string composed of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 force tiles, and along this path we can see that the orange player has 1, 2, because weavers count 2 playing pieces, whereas the black player has 1, 2, 3 playing pieces. So this string will be controlled by the black player, who takes all of those strings and adds them to his collection. After scoring each and every string on the game, we count the number of tiles, and the player who has the most of them wins. In case of a tie, while scoring a string, the string is supposed to be uncontrolled and no one receives the tiles. If at the end there is no winner, it's well, yes, the player who did the most strings of fate wins. There's no additional tie breaker, but those situations would be quite rare. So that's it when it comes to the rules of Agamemnon. Now I would like to tell you what are my opinions about this game, what are its strong points and what I believe are its a little bit weaker points. At the beginning of this review, I have already said that I am not a big fan of logical games. So while testing Agamemnon, I didn't have any high expectations concerning this title. But I must say that this game really has something, because when I played my first game, I immediately wanted to play another, and then for a week or two I just played several games with different people, and I must say that myself and also my gaming partners really had fun with this title. It's a very good game. It's a game which, in my opinion, has 3 very strong points which I would like to underline. The first one is that the game is really quick to play. You can easily play a game in 20-30 minutes or even in 15 minutes if you play fast. You do not have to spend 15-20 minutes setting the game up. You just set up it in 1 or 2 minutes and you begin playing. It's really fast. Then the gameplay is also fast, but of course, as in many logical games, you will want to concentrate on your moves. You will have to choose the perfect or the most prolific solution or the best move in the situation, in your current situation. So some downtime will happen, especially if you happen to play with a person which likes to analyze a lot. It's not bad, because while playing logical games such as chess, such as Go, you should be used to the fact that your opponent and yourself will be thinking a lot about your future moves. The second aspect of Agamemnon, which I really liked and which I believe is one of its landmarks and strongest points, is its replayability. It's a game which can be mastered when you play on the first side of the board, the basic side of the board. But then, even if you master, if you achieve a great knowledge of this side of the board, there is still the second one. So you can create many different configurations on the second side, on the loom side of the board. Furthermore, during gameplay, you will also randomly draw your playing pieces. So each and every game of Agamemnon will be played differently. There is not a theory of openings like in chess, because each time the board can look differently and each time you will draw different pieces. So how is it when it comes to luck in Agamemnon? In many logical games, luck is an inferior aspect, is a thing which is so small that sometimes it has absolutely no impact on gameplay. In Agamemnon, I would say luck is a small factor, because sometimes it decides of which pieces you receive. But at the same time, while drawing randomly your pieces, you will have to choose the best way to use those tiles. Tiles, as you already know, can be used in order to control different strings and different types of strings. So you should carefully choose the spot where you place your tile, because placing this tile will grant you some benefits, but you also, by making this decision, are deciding not to use the tile elsewhere. So you have to maximize your points each time you have the opportunity to play. And I like it a lot, because while drawing your playing tiles, you will have to carefully look at all the board, which is not that big, but where different solutions and different combinations will happen, and each move can change totally the way that the current control of the strings look like. So the luck is a small factor in Agamemnon, but I would say it is just the right dose of luck that you should have in a logical game. So what are the weaker points of Agamemnon, in my opinion? First of all, I must say that this is a classical logical game, and despite the fact that the author and the company tried to include some theme in it, it's still very dry. It's still a very logical game. It's not about the Trojan War. Don't be fooled. You have leaders with names. You have the Agamemnon fantastic logo, but it has absolutely no relation to the Trojan War. And to some people who like Euro games, who do not like dry games, this might be a problem. I believe it would be a great idea if some optional rules were included, where, for instance, leaders of both sides had some special abilities. I understand that this would differentiate both armies, and that would be good, because now both armies work just the same way. Both players have absolutely the same assets, the same playing pieces. It was not a problem to include optional rules enabling players to have some special abilities. Their leaders, for instance, could change spots one time during gameplay, or they could increase the strength of a tile, etc., etc. Just imagination would be the limit. By giving such optional rules, the game would receive additional depth. It would also be more appealing to people not keen of logical games. Even without it, I believe Agamemnon is a very solid design. It's a great logical game, and I will definitely keep it in my collection. I'm not a big fan of logical games, but this one, in my opinion, is something that stands out. I like the playing time, I like the mechanisms, I like the way that it has a huge replayability. It's just a great game to have, it's just a great game to play. This was Agamemnon from Osprey Games. I hope you will have a fantastic day. I also invite you to look at our other materials. We have some reviews, unboxings, top 10s. Take also a look at our geek list on Board Game Geek, and please subscribe our channel in order to receive information about future videos. See you next time. Bye.